You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. Are boobs news? 41,517 people say they're not, and are calling for the editor of the Sun newspaper in the UK to stop putting topless women on page 3, which has been an editorial practice for 40 years, some calling it a British institution. Lucy Holmes began her anti-page 3 campaign after buying the Sun during the Olympics. The biggest image in the paper was of a topless woman with just her knickers on, despite athlete Jessica Ennis winning gold for Team GB. The campaign is targeting the editor. Dominic Mohan, take the bare boobs out of the Sun, #no more page 3. So to discuss this campaign, with me in the studio is political blogger Charlotte Henry, founder of the Weak Woman blog Caroline Criado-Perez, and on the telephone, Dr Rita Pal, a psychiatrist and medical journalist, and writer and broadcaster Terence Blacker. Do pictures of topless women on page 3 of a national newspaper with a daily circulation of 2.5 million readers have a justified place in 2012? I'll start with you, Caroline Criado-Perez.
Well, I feel that they don't. The main objection that I have to page 3 is not in any way the nudity so much as the context, which is that it's in a newspaper which should be about telling us about the important things that are happening today. And the female contribution, the major contribution to that, is a massive image of a woman standing there not doing anything, which when you put it in the context of lots of men going around doing lots of things, it's very problematic about, what we think women are capable of.
So you're talking a woman with bare breasts versus a man in a suit going about their business and what people see in the publication. Charlotte?
Well, I think the biggest problem actually is that we need more high-profile women. Actually, I think page 3 in itself is a bit of a straw man. I mean, would I choose to? I read the Sun, but would I choose to stare at page 3? No, not really. But I'm more interested in achievements of women. I think they should have more coverage, and I think this focusing on page 3 is just a bit of a straw man, actually, to the bigger issues, which is we need more high-profile women in society, in politics, in law, in the media, and so on. I think that's a much more something we should be focusing on a lot more.
But does this page 3, anti-page 3 campaign not highlight these issues in some way?
No, like I said, I think it's a straw man. I think we should be having a campaign about promoting fantastic women, like you mentioned Jessica Ennis, but there's plenty of others in all sorts of walks of life, and I would like the Sun and all newspapers to be giving them more coverage instead of us worrying about page 3.
Terence Blacker, what do you think? Does page 3 have a justified place in 2012, or do you agree with Charlotte that it's a bit of a straw man?
Well, I agree with a lot of what's been said, in that obviously one wants as much positive coverage of women's achievements these days. I personally think there's quite a lot in the press, but I agree, obviously one would agree with that. But I just think it's old-fashioned. I now think that we've sort of outgrown this. It's something very 70s. It's sort of carry-on films, this seems to be more to do with comedy than sex, and I think it's sort of embarrassing that it's part of our national life, and I think this campaign, the tone of this campaign is very good. It's not, these should be banned, it's not thumping the table, it's just saying, come on, let's grow up a bit and recognise that the time for this kind of sort of mild titillation over a cup of tea is past, and we should just move on and obviously the Sun is entertainment as much as news. So it's no good requiring them to report from Syria all the time. Obviously, there's going to be light stuff in there, but I think there are much bigger stories and more important things to worry about. And I just think they should just be given a little bit of a shake and told to grow up.
So you're hoping the editor will listen to the Take the Bare Boobs Out of the Sun campaign?
I completely support the campaign, and obviously he won't respond to the campaign, but I hope that once the campaign has done its work, they'll be quietly reduced and then dropped.
Dr Rita Pal, you're a psychiatrist and medical journalist. Do you feel they have a place in 2012?
Well, I do, actually, to be honest. I think we have a time at the moment of financial austerity, and we really don't need cultural austerity. I think the medical profession partly has a very paternalistic approach, and also intellectuals in society have adopted a similar approach. But I think real people in the real world don't really like being told what to do, basically. And I think the readers, I mean, The Sun has 3 million women readers actually buying the paper, and 4 million men obviously read it. And the petition at the moment has 40,000 signatures now, so it's proportionally fairly low on that. Now, I think if you look at history, I mean, the breast has been a secondary sexual characteristic, and it's obviously built to attract the male. And Page 3 is basically a national institution, and it's part of our society now. People have got used to it, and it is just a bit of harmless fun. I know that's the argument that a lot of Page 3 girls have advocated, especially in the Oxford debate that they won. But I think that we've come to a point where we've gone back. We're in the Victorian age now, and we're trying to actually censor a newspaper page. And the Victorians were like this. They always felt that, I suppose, the working class needed to be controlled in certain ways, and maybe the working class were more animalistic in nature. But I think, there's been a lot of debate about Page 3 or pictures like that causing domestic violence and sexual assault. But actually, evidentially, the links are very poor. So the campaign that's been mounted, and admirably, and she's obviously entitled to, mount a petition. The campaign that's been mounted actually isn't evidence-based, to be honest. I mean, if we think about it, the availability of pornography has been increasing over the last 10 years. The incidence of domestic violence has actually gone down, and the incidence of sexual, assault has actually remained static. So there's no real correlation, I think, from a scientific basis. I guess, if a lot of feminists wanted to run a campaign like this that was successful, that they could actually do a proper investigatory study on the impact of Page 3, which really hasn't been done, and also persuade us all.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. And joining me to discuss the anti-Page 3 campaign is Dr Rita Pal, a medical journalist and psychiatrist, writer and broadcaster Terence Blacker, founder of the Weak Women blog Criado-Perez, and political blogger Charlotte Henry. I just wanted to hear from Charlotte, really. What's your response to this cultural austerity, then?
Yeah, I mean, I rather agree. I'm very uncomfortable with the kind of idea saying this type of image is acceptable in a newspaper. I mean, we've seen quite much more, to my mind, offensive images, for example, of Gaddafi when he was dying was put on newspapers. I find those images significantly more offensive than a girl who has consented. Let's be very clear about this. Those women have consented, are well paid to appear in those pictures, as they're perfectly entitled to do. And this idea of censoring something in a newspaper makes me very, very uncomfortable.
Caroline?
I have a lot of problems with the things that have been said on this. The idea of censorship isn't actually what the petition's about. It's about trying to educate people about the problems.
Isn't it?
Well, it's not self-censorship so much as agreeing to listen to what people are saying and saying, fair enough, we're not going to do this. I mean, if someone said that the page was racist, you would self-censor that, but nobody would be objecting to that in the same way. But somehow it's always all right, when people are being sexist, somehow that's something that women just have to put up with. And of course the women have consented to do it. No one's saying that, and they can carry on doing that. But all the other women who see the paper and who live in the society that this paper engenders haven't consented to be viewed as sexual objects.
Charlotte?
All sorts of people read The Sun, and that's sort of its attraction. But like I said, I don't understand how we can just start, choosing the type of images. We live in a free market society where people are absolutely entitled to not buy The Sun. I would speculate that many of the people involved in this campaign don't read The Sun anyway, to start off with. And actually, there's another point which we haven't really touched on, which is that this campaign focuses on one page 3 and one newspaper, which sort of fits into this zeitgeist of Leveson and Murdoch and all those things. Actually, if you read the Daily Star or the Daily Sport, there are actually far more gratuitous, perhaps is the word, images of women in those newspapers as well. And it seems bizarre that this campaign has chosen to cash in on this sort of anti-Murdoch feeling.
Terence, I'd like to bring you in now.
Yeah.
Obviously, you mentioned the sort of, okay, you support the campaign, but there is a certain hypocrisy to it in some way.
I mean, I think there are all sorts of things about which one can disapprove. I mean, if I could, and I do think there's a connection between the Duchess of Cambridge and I agree with Charlotte Henry in that it's easy to bash the Sun, and one could easily look at the Daily Mail and say the Daily Mail will have a disapproving editorial about the Sun, but then 2 pages later they'll have a photograph of the wind blowing the skirt up of a member of the royal family, saying "Ooh," and they'll have a sort of a saucy little caption saying "caught unguarded moment." But it's the same impulse. It's voyeuristic. It's pathetic, and it's basically doing for its probably more middle class audience what Page 3 is doing for in the Sun. And I would personally think that's sort of more disgusting and tacky, because it's pretending not to be about sex when it is. Whereas at least the Page 3 thing is up front, as it were, about what it's doing. I personally think for Rita Pal to talk about it being paternalistic to campaign. No one's suggesting it should be censored, by the way. It's just a campaign to remove it. I would have thought the most paternalistic thing of all is, if you look at those captions, is presenting usually these teenage girls, so presenting young girls, sort of making sort of fake comments about the news. That is the ultimate sort of middle-aged man behavior. I'm surprised that she doesn't have a slight problem with that. I'm not saying it should be banned, I'm just saying it's embarrassing.
Rita, then, your response to Terence suggesting that you ought to have a slight problem with the fact that these captions are written next to these topless women about what they think about the current news of the day.
I don't have a problem with it, because, I've worked in the NHS. I know my patients have read it. I know a lot of doctors read it, and we all laugh at
Don't you think it's a problem that you're laughing at the idea that a beautiful woman can have read Nietzsche, can have an opinion on particle science?
Well, I have a sense of humour about most things, and I think comedy, things like Benny Hill or Carry On films, they're always on television quite regularly, and people love them. And I think that,
So you're happy with people to laugh at racist jokes, to laugh at rape jokes? You think that this isn't a problem at all? You think that it doesn't matter that laughter is about mocking? Shouldn't laughter be about something actually being humorous rather than, satire is meant to be the weapon of the weak against the powerful, and News and Brief is certainly not doing that.
Well, hang on a second. The first aspect is you can't regulate a person's mind. You can't legislate against a person's mind. I disapprove of a lot of things, all right? I petition about a lot of things as well, if you look at change.org, all right? So, but my point really is this, a lot of people find wit in various aspects of society. We can't go around controlling every single thing just because we disapprove of it.
Of course we can't, but we can ask, the highest circulating newspaper to show a little bit of respect and not keep putting out day after day the same message that beautiful women are kind of stupid.
But I think
Charlotte,
I don't think that they do put across beautiful women are stupid. That's just not the ethos of it.
Charlotte Henry, you next.
So I do just think this comes back to my original point, which is actually the issue is not Page 3, which I don't accept a lot of the things that have been put forward that, Page 3 advocates a rape culture and a sexual assault culture of women. I just do not accept that. But I think the bigger issue is actually we need to have more prominent women and their achievements covered in the media, and that's what I actually care much more about than News in Brief, which, I would prefer it wasn't there. I think it's a bit silly, but I don't find the notion of it offensive. I think it's only.
Don't you think it would be just plain odd if you had opposite page 3, say on page 2 something about women's achievements and about how well they're doing, and then on page 3 you have something which absolutely undermines the whole idea of equality.
No, but I don't accept that it undermines equality.
I've got a question about this, actually.
Well, hold on, stop. Right. Okay, Terence, finish, and then Caroline next.
No, I'm not sure that I really go along with this idea. Firstly, I think women do get well. I think the achievements of
stop. No, Terence.
But if the idea is to produce more positive news about women, more positive images, then surely it's logical that you can't have this incredibly patronising business of having, say you had something, page 2 about women's achievements, then opposite you've got Tracy, age 17, ooh, what a lovely pair, commenting on Syria. It's an absurdity. It makes everything look silly. It undermines the whole idea
it's
of
an
women
absurdity
being
to you. It's
equal.
a subjective opinion, isn't it?
And we also have highly sexualised images of men, but because they're balanced out with sways of male achievement, we don't see it in that way. The issue is that page 3 is not balanced.
Right,
but I must bring in Caroline now because I did interrupt her.
Okay, I've got a number of things to ask, really. I completely agree with Charlotte that we do need more prominent women in the media, and that is obviously a very real problem. However, I strongly feel that page 3, being the largest representation of what women do in a newspaper, fosters a sort of, to use a Labour phrase, poverty of aspiration for women. And that's based on studies that demonstrate a massive lack of self-esteem in women based around their looks, and young women. And, there was a study recently released that said that if this wasn't changed, the likelihood of another female prime minister was going to drop from 73% to 63%, which is a pretty shocking drop. I mean, it should be 100% likelihood that there's going to be a future female prime minister. And, I would question the idea that page 3 doesn't undermine the idea that women can be powerful. Based on last Friday's Sun's page 3, which was a picture of Hattie from Camberwell, page 23, which was meant to basically say to Harriet Harman, you may be a really powerful politician, but you're just a pair of tits to us. And I'm sorry, if they use it in that way to attack a female politician, then how can anyone claim that they think it isn't undermining? They were trying to undermine her by showing her as just a piece of meat.
Can I ask you a question?
You may, yeah.
Yes. What's wrong with the career aim of being a page 3 model?
There's nothing wrong with being the career aim of being a page 3 model.
Yes,
what's wrong is the idea that it's the only career aim. It's very limiting to suggest that women are only valued according to their looks, as the Sun repeatedly says by everyone who disagrees is fat, ugly, jealous, flat-chested. You can't disagree unless you're somehow jealous that you can't look as good as them.
Well, that's their view,
Terence
isn't it?
next.
But they're entitled to a view. I mean, it's Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights.
Of course they're entitled to a view, but the view says a lot.
To your view.
The view says a lot about what the image that page 3 represents.
Terence, what did you want to say?
Well, I don't think anyone here is arguing that people shouldn't have views. My view about this is that I write books for children, and I go into schools quite a lot. And Rita is absolutely wrong. I mean, she's not wrong. I would disagree when she say what's wrong with having an aspiration to be a page 3 girl. The fact is, an extraordinary. If you talk to children in secondary schools, an extraordinary number of the girls sees that as a really, they want to be Jordan. They want to. And I do think that's a real problem when we've got really quite bright children and their parents rather supporting them. And are you
saying page 3 girls aren't bright because they recently won the Oxford debate a few years ago? So their debates actually, were worthwhile, really, weren't they?
I think what Terence is saying is what the newspaper represents in terms of aspiration for young children growing up, be it male or female. These female children these young women in schools are seeing a page 3 topless model in a national newspaper and seeing it's accepted.
But they're not actually seeing page 3 specifically. I mean, they've got lots of environmental factors. There's the internet, there's Playboy, there's lots of...
But they're not contextual. They're not contextualised by news. That's the problem. I've got no problem with nudity.
As well. In fact, one of the studies that actually you quoted it yourself, I think, Caroline, about Lads magazine. So the authors actually stated there that the interviews on YouTube, if you want to go and have a look at it, they stated that censorship is not a solution, and they advocated good sex education. And I think that's where the problems lie. I mean, the perceptions, obviously, of how people will perceive page 3 in terms of career aspirations, and people have careers guidance through school. We did. Everyone does. And it's no one's actually forced into going to apply for page 3 or whatever, but it is a careers option, and it's an admirable careers option, just like being a doctor, an engineer, a writer, such as yourselves, So I think all these are, and I think it's degrading for people who actually...
Consider it yourself?
Pardon?
Did you ever consider it as a career yourself?
I would have considered it, to be honest, yes. I mean, in retrospect, I'm actually from an Asian family, and quite a conservative Asian family. We were all obviously, taught to be educated and be very intelligent and all that sort of thing, and I made it through medical school and subsequently onwards. But I think, in terms of,
If you had a daughter, I don't know what your position is. If
I
you had
don't
a
have
daughter
any children,
and she
no.
said, I can't make up my mind between being a doctor and a page 3 girl, would you say, well...
I think the photograph would look pretty good with a white coat and nothing underneath.
But the white coat might be covering the boobs, that's the point.
So your daughter says, I can't make up my mind whether I want to pursue a career as a topless model or a doctor. What would your answer be?
Well, I'd basically give them the information for both and let them make their own judgment.
No,
and I wouldn't have an objection.
You're a parent.
I actually would not have I have nieces, by the way. I would not have an objection to them wanting to go and model or wanting to go and...
But if they're asking your advice between a doctor and they're turning to you. They're teenagers. They're 16. They can pose.
Of course, teenagers have brains as well, and certainly my nieces have brains. And what do you do with teenagers?
You won't give advice.
Sorry?
You don't give advice.
Right, moving on.
Let me just finish that point. Can I just
go on? Just finish that point.
2 seconds on that point. I don't think teenagers need to be dictated to. That's the first thing. I think they need to be given the information, and they can actually make their own minds up about things. And if you're talking about younger children, maybe the advice issue works. So anyway, that was the point I wanted to make. Yeah.
But I think we need to talk just a tiny bit about the actual campaign. I don't want to lose sight of that. It's the fact that it has a fixture in a family newspaper.
Okay, first of all, I suspect most people who run this campaign have never read The Sun, but at the weekend, the page 3 models are not topless. There are models on page 3, but they are clothed, just about. And
with a white coat.
Indeed.
You like my idea?
No, but the point is that when it is a family read at the weekend, a more conceivable time that children, younger people might see those images, they are covered and they do respect that kind of family image. And I return to the point that I find it very bizarre this campaign focuses just on The Sun. But also, we're talking about how bad it is, women want to be glamour models, whatever. There are plenty of very vain men out there who would love to be models as well.
Caroline.
The point actually that you raise about The Sun at the weekend not having a topless model, to me that just that's quite hypocritical. That's sort of saying that, actually it's not very good, and if kids are going to see it, we probably shouldn't have that. Which makes it really hard for them to say it's just a harmless bit of fun. If they think it's so harmless, then why don't they have it at the weekend? And my final point would be to address this idea of aspirations for glamour models. One of the things that I find most problematic about the pervasiveness of having a woman in a newspaper just based on the fact that she's very pretty is that it therefore adds to this culture where women are judged on the way that they look. And it's an extra thing, no matter what you do, whatever career you're going into, and which should have nothing to do with looks, you are judged additionally on the way you look. Let's take, Hillary Clinton, who
is now the Secretary of State.
Yeah, and she's the Secretary of State, and she had to have weeks of media coverage over why she wasn't wearing makeup and why she was wearing glasses. I mean, what kind of society is that? Would that ever have happened to David Cameron, Barack Obama? Would they have had to sort of make a statement about the fact that they were wearing glasses? Of course they wouldn't.
But we absolutely have discussions about Barack Obama's sexy salt and pepper hair and all the rest of it, David Cameron's bald spot.
It is nothing like a whole media campaign based solely, there were weeks of articles about the meaning behind the fact that she was wearing glasses. It was absolutely ridiculous. She's the most powerful woman in the world.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare, and we're discussing the anti-Page 3 campaign in the Sun newspaper. Joining me in the studio is political blogger Charlotte Henry, founder of the Weak Women blog Caroline Criado-Perez, Dr Rita Pal, psychiatrist and medical journalist, and writer and broadcaster Terence Blacker. Yeah. Obviously, you support the anti-Page 3 campaign, and you obviously questioned Rita as whether she would give advice to someone who is looking for a career, whether they'd choose to be a doctor or a glamour model. Now, for you, what issues arise from this anti-Page 3 campaign that are the biggest ones?
I think the Page 3 and I would put in put in other kinds of sexualization of women. I'm not in favor of censorship of really virtually any kind, but certainly not in this area. But I think we do have to ask ourselves if this way of presenting women, this sort of light titillation, is, I mean, I know it's part of life. I know there's porn at the click of a switch and a click of a mouse, and that it's all around us. But I think the difference is, and particularly with children with young girls and young boys, is that it's just normalized. The point that you made, Juliet, is it's normalized. It's just you open your paper, it could be about the party conference, it could be Tracy with her tits out. And that, I just think, is bad for young people's heads. And I think you should begin to recognize that actually it's affecting us in all sorts of ways. And as I said at the beginning, I just think it's time for us to grow up and to evolve a little as a society. I'm not at all in favor, I'm quite libertarian in my general approach to life, but I just think, maybe we should just say, look, come on, let's grow up.
Charlotte Henry, a final word from you.
I mean, maybe we should grow up, but, we have Page 3, and frankly, there are far more damaging things to women than a bit of, glamour modelling. And actually, we need to look at the positive contributions of women a lot more. And I do take points about, constantly talking about women's appearance, and that's fine, but I don't believe it's related to Page 3. I think we have a wider societal issue around not promoting women enough, and I think we need to look at that instead of focusing on this straw man of Page 3, which basically this whole campaign feels like we've returned to the 70s or 80s.
Dr Rita Pal, you mentioned the Carry On films when we're talking about return to the 70s. A final word from you.
I think I don't think the Page 3 issue should have been given so much publicity, because it's actually given the Page 3 issue, the Page 3 itself more and more publicity as we speak, and we're doing the same here. But the ironic issue about Page 3 is that we accept nude art at the National Gallery, and I'm sure Terence will know that many school children go to the National Gallery, and you've got paintings there like the Cupid Folly and Time. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's basically, as many art historians will tell you, it's quite explicit in nature. But
it's in an art gallery, not a newspaper.
Well, the pictures all over the internet.
But they're on the internet, not a newspaper.
So what's the difference between that and a newspaper?
The point of the newspaper is that it clues in the name. It's a newspaper. It's for news. And finally, I would just like to add that for everyone who says it's not such a big deal, why do we care about it? In that case, why not get rid of it? I mean, what is it for? I've yet to hear anyone make a positive, make a positive argument for Page 3. No one can say what purpose it serves.
One final point. I think a lot of people concentrate on power and achievement, and very few people consider the word happiness. I think that happiness is extremely important in life. Okay, whatever makes people happy, they could do for their career. And I think that
so long as they're not damaging anyone else, presumably you would agree.
Well, damaging, yes, of course.
Right,
but
well, there we go.
In what way? I mean, you have the right not to buy the Sun.
Right, I'm going to end the discussion there. Thank you very much for all my guests for joining me. Political blogger Charlotte Henry, founder of the Weak Women blog Caroline Criado-Perez, on the telephone Dr Rita Pal, and writer and broadcaster Terence Blacker.